Hi everyone. It is the start of the school year, which means classes are starting, small groups are starting, we're meeting new people, and you know what comes with that? Icebreakers! I am not one for icebreaker games, but I do love icebreaker questions, and this one is one of my favorites. What is the story behind something you're wearing right now? Like 10 seconds or less. We'll hear from like one or two people. What's the story behind something you're wearing right now? Go ahead.
So this dress is made in Italy. I was in Italy with Elizabeth.
Yes.
It reminded me of this.
Super cool. A dress made in Italy. I love it. Elizabeth, by the way, is on Zoom because she's typically in Italy. She runs our Florence International program, so we're really happy to have her here in person. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, this dress, I went on a cruise and I played bingo and spilled blue ink all over it, and so my mom put patches all over it.
Oh, wow, lovely. So it's patched up by your mom. So fun. A chaotic experience turned into a favorite dress. I love that. What's the story behind something I'm wearing right now? Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. I'm wearing my 3 tree necklaces today. This one, and then this little one in the middle. They're really special to me. I'm almost always wearing at least one of them. I don't typically wear all 3. It's a little extra, but I do love them all a lot. They are a visible sign and reminder of my faith. In the same way some people wear a cross to remind them of the story of Jesus, I wear trees. The tree is one of the most common symbols in the Bible. In fact, other than humans and God, trees are the living thing that are mentioned the most often, even more than all animals combined. Trees show up at almost every major plot point in the story of the Bible. So not only do they remind me of God's character, but also looking at a tree is like being reminded of the entire story of God with God's people. The tree of life appears on the very first page and the very last page of the Bible. And trees show up everywhere in between. The Garden of Eden, the Ark and the flood, the burning bush, the tabernacle and the temple, the mustard seed and the fig tree, the vine and the branches, Gethsemane, the fruits of the Spirit, the new heavens and the new earth, trees, trees, and more trees. Jesus died on a wooden cross, which of course we sometimes describe as Jesus hanging on a tree. And the tree represents the empty tomb, too. Deciduous trees, in particular, trees that lose their leaves in the winter and revive in the spring, are, of course, one of the most vivid symbols of resurrection that we have. I think when we look at trees, we get a glimpse of who God is. And over again, the Bible invites humans to see ourselves in trees. When you get a chance, check out the trees in Genesis and Exodus, Psalms and Proverbs, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Hosea, all 4 of the Gospels, letters like James, Romans, and Colossians. There are literally dozens, maybe hundreds of examples we could reference where the Bible compares trees and humans. It'd take you a long time to get through all of them. Our passage for today is one of those stories that compares humans and trees. We are studying this beautiful prayer in chapter 3 of Ephesians, a letter written by Paul. The Apostle Paul was a missionary in the first century whose special task was to share the good news of Jesus across the Roman Empire with people who were not Jewish. Paul planted churches all around the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, including in the city of Ephesus. Ephesus was a hub for the worship of the Greek and Roman gods, especially the goddess Artemis. Yet Paul's missionary work to the Ephesians was extremely effective there. Many people came to believe in the one true God, and multiple churches grew in Ephesus. Paul spent a couple of years with the Ephesians, teaching them about Jesus, before moving on to plant churches in other areas. And many years later, the Romans arrested Paul for sharing the gospel, and while he was in prison, he wrote this beautiful letter of encouragement to all the churches in Ephesus that we now know as Ephesians in our Bibles. The first half of this letter, chapters 1 through 3, are a summary of the gospel story. As Paul is sitting in prison, he wants to remind the Ephesians of what they believe and why they are committed to it. Now, there are many ways to summarize the gospel or the good news about Jesus. Every sermon we hear should be a reminder of the good news for a specific people in a specific time at a specific place. So, of course, there's no way to capture every aspect of the gospel every time we share the good news, right? The good news is like, a forest. And while it's great to get aerial views of the forest, that's not the same as hiking through the trees. We also have to walk among its paths and get to know each tree one at a time. So in this letter, Paul focuses on the good news that through Jesus, all of humanity is part of God's unified family. Paul wants the Ephesians to know that even though they are not Jewish, even though they spent most of their lives worshiping the Greek gods and goddesses, even though they are now facing persecution for following Jesus, they can trust that they have been adopted into the family of God. Ephesians 1-3 is a celebration that Jesus designed the church to be a diverse family, with family members of all different nations and languages and cultures, with family members of all different gifts and worship styles and even personal opinions. And yet, all of us are rooted in the same loving God who unites us in our diversity, so that it is not despite our differences, but through our differences that we experience and practice peace. We are, in Christ, diverse individuals who are part of one unified family. That is good news. Paul thought so. After writing down this summary of the gospel, Paul falls to his knees in prayer that the Ephesians would just begin to grasp the immense love that God has for God's people, including the Ephesians. This is what he says. Let's read it again. For this reason, that is the good news that all humans are now in God's family through Jesus. For this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that according to the riches of God's glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through the Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. That Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. This was Paul's prayer for the Ephesians then, and it is my prayer for our church today. College students, as your campus minister, this is my prayer especially for you this year. Those of you who are current college students or recent grads, you are in a stage of life called emerging adulthood. If you are between the ages of 18 and about 29-ish, you are in this really weird stage of life when you are definitely no longer a child, but you are also not necessarily fully an adult yet either. you are slowly emerging into adulthood. Like, you're no longer a little sapling who needs that little wire fence to protect you from the bunnies, but you also still need some attention from the gardeners, right? You got me? Okay. So, like, maybe you're responsible for all your expenses, except you're also on your parents' health insurance plan and they still pay your cell phone bill, right? You're working full-time and going to school full-time, and you still have that one family member who tracks your location and texts you why aren't you in your dorm at 9 p.m. sharp. Here's the thing about emerging adulthood as a sociological category. It is marked by utter instability. Emerging adults are in a constant state of transition. It's right there in the name, emerging. A lot about the college experience specifically is impermanent, even fleeting. It's the exact opposite of being rooted and grounded. Your living situation changes twice a year, at least. Your entire class schedule changes every few months. Every day looks different than the last. Home feels weird because you haven't really lived there in a while, but your dorm room or apartment isn't really home either. Here at Pepperdine, most students study abroad at some point, which is both delightful and disorienting. And students here have the blessing and the bombardment of an endless buffet of choices of things to do. About 80% of college students in the US change majors at some point. And between the ages of 18 and 24, young adults change jobs more than 5 times on average. And then after you graduate college, the median tenure in a job is only 3 years for people in their mid-20s to early 30s. That means emerging adults are statistically likely to change locations, jobs, and even careers multiple times in about a 10-year period. And that's not even addressing the relational changes of this stage of life. Dating, breaking up, maybe getting engaged or married, making friends and drifting away from old friends, shifting dynamics with parents and siblings and other relatives, questions and doubts about faith and who God is, etc., etc., etc. Do you feel like you're in a frenzy just hearing this list? Because I feel like my heart is racing just saying it. And I would bet there are some 40-year-olds or 60-year-olds, or maybe even 80-year-olds, who are hearing this feeling like, am I an emerging adult? Life sometimes can be so chaotic, so uncertain, so unrooted. None of this is necessarily a terrible thing, right? Before Nate and I landed here, we jumped around a lot in our 20s. And so much of that transition and instability has helped me grow as a person and as a follower of Jesus. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And we're in good company. Jesus was a nomad, constantly on the move and meeting different kinds of people in different cultures and communities. And yet Jesus did it in a way that wasn't frenetic. Jesus was peaceful. Jesus was calm. Jesus was unhurried. Jesus didn't try to root himself in things that were fleeting, like accomplishments and accolades. Jesus rooted himself in the trustworthy love of God and in the stories and rhythms of his people. So it's not bad to be experiencing the instability of emerging adulthood or any other chaotic season of life, for that matter. And what it means to be transformed into Christ-likeness is to learn how to be rooted and grounded in the love of God, even in the midst of the instability. The good news is we don't have to grow roots out of thin air, right? Jesus is dwelling. Jesus is building a house. Jesus is settling down. Jesus is tabernacling in the core of who we are. Christ in us is the water that causes us to grow. When we look at trees, we see such a tiny fraction of the story. We can't see the sap flowing through the trunk or the leaves. We can't see the buds becoming flowers, becoming fruit. We can't see the sunlight making sugar somehow. Trees are so unhurried in their growth. And we can't see what's happening under the soil either. We can imagine tree roots digging deep for nutrients and water, but trees do more than take nutrients for themselves. Roots also reach out for the roots of other trees. Roots entangle together intentionally because it makes all of the trees stronger. Through their roots, trees develop what researchers call bonds of friendship. Through their roots, trees communicate with each other about resources. They warn each other about dangers. Trees are so far from isolated individuals. They are communities. They are neighborhoods that know each other and support each other. Trees thrive best in forests. And specifically, trees thrive best in biodiverse forests. Forests with a huge variety of trees and other plants. The more types of trees there are, the more unified the ecosystem can be, and the healthier each individual tree is too. If creation is God's cathedral, then forests are local churches, modeling to us what it means to be rooted and grounded in God's love together. To be rooted well in God is synonymous with being rooted well in community. A community who doesn't drain you dry, but who nourishes you and sustains you. A community who does not contribute to the chaos, but who offers spaces of abiding peace and unhurried transformation. A community who isn't homogenous, because we all know that's how disease spreads, but who shares the wisdom of diverse life stages and experiences and perspectives. If you haven't already, I hope you find that community here at University Church. I have. And my tree necklaces remind me of that too, of all the people and of all the communities who have shaped me into who I am today, who have shown me the face of God, who have shown me the character and the way of Jesus. This church tops the list. This church adopting me into this family is what has made tangible for me my adoption into the family of God. And so, it is for this reason that I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that according to the riches of God's glory, your roots may sink down deep into the fertile soil of God's love, entangling in the roots of your adopted family. May your branches spread wide, bearing good fruit that nourishes others. And when the storms hit, when your branches sway, when all your leaves and all your fruit are broken and scattered around you, may you know that you are sturdy and safe in the firm ground of the love of Christ Jesus, our rock and our Redeemer. You are a tree indeed, but you are a tree in a forest, and that is good news.